Hey, how's it going, internet people? Nate here, and today we're going to be talking about The Elder Scrolls 6 and what it can learn from Fallout 4, discussing again where Fallout 4 went wrong, and of course how the next Elder Scrolls should avoid making the same mistakes, but also talk a little bit about what Fallout 4 did right. And I feel like a lot of the valid compliments that this game deserves are often overshadowed by lesser criticisms. So I do want to talk about where Fallout 4 went wrong, but also particularly where it went right, and what lessons TES 6 should take from it all. Starting off with faults is one that the community and myself have been very vocal about, and that is the voice protagonist system. Now, it's not the fact that the protagonist character has a voice in it of itself that most people dislike, it's what it generally entails. The voice actors can only speak so many lines, so you go from having these vast trees of possible conversations with up to dozens of different things to say that can branch off into entirely separate conversations and tangents, as was the case with previous Bethesda titles, to a more linear style of conversation where those dramatic tangents aren't so prevalent, and the options that you do have for dialogue are much more limiting, and that's what really broke the immersion for me. I had less of an impact on the directions the conversations I had went, and less of an influence on what I really meant to say. Now, I will admit that giving the protagonist a voice was a very noble ambition, I just don't think it really panned out all that well in my opinion. Continuing on with things that I'm bitter about is settlement mode. Now, settlements in and of itself seems like a pretty fun experience, and to be honest, it really is. The problem that I have with it is that most of the DLC we have for Fallout 4 was focused on this game mode, that had already encouraged a huge disparity among the players. Much of the community just didn't really care for settlement building, and to that you might say, well, wait a minute, Nate, why don't they just not play it? Well, that's rather hard to do, and most of your DLC focuses on it. Settlement mode was also marketed to be an extra to the game, right? But it seems to have significantly detracted resources that could have been better spent elsewhere, giving the game more higher quality quests and content. But instead, we get this mode that had a huge amount of effort obviously put into it, only for many players to reject it. And even today, it still feels a little bit unfinished with all the clipping issues. Now, I do understand that settlement mode has been a fun way to express our creativity, and it does give the game more longevity. However, I just don't really believe Bethesda executed it the right way. Alright, so now with the majority of the bad stuff out of the way, what did Bethesda do right? Well, for starters, right off the bat of the game, I think the first thing we all noticed was a much better customization of our character's appearance. In all previous Fallouts and Elder Scrolls titles, we were forced to make do with these ridiculous, incomprehensible sliders, and it made it very difficult to give your character the look that you actually wanted and cared for. Whereas Fallout 4 finally broke those boundaries and gave us the ability to grab on and drag features around that made customization a hell of a lot easier. We went from simple, generic-looking characters to things of the likes of Hulk Hogan, Walter White, hell, even the Zodiac Killer. Point is, Bethesda finally nailed the cosmetic side of character customization, and they definitely need to bring the system to the Elder Scrolls 6. We can no longer go back to sliders. That period is officially over, okay, Bethesda? Good. Speaking of customizations, I think it's safe to say that the armor and weaponsmiths were relatively welcome new additions, getting to add on actual scopes to our guns, customizing our armor patterns and our own power armor. These were all welcome new additions to the Fallout franchise, and frankly, what I'm most mad about here is that they weren't done sooner. They seem like such simple concepts with such dramatic results. Power armor seems like an actual big deal in Fallout 4, rather than the glorified Party City costume it had been in its predecessors. Going off that comment about gun sights, combat saw a dramatic improvement. Gone are the days in which you squint instead of actually aiming. That's also got a revamp, in which it's no longer totally capable of pausing the game entirely, but instead slows it down to a nice pace instead. And personally, I've always felt as though Skyrim, and really all the other TES games for that matter, were quite lacking in combat to begin with. So what's the takeaway from this video? Well, for one, maybe Bethesda should try not to f*** up settlement mode again. I mean, of course, maybe give us back the silent protagonist. I understand Bethesda tried to do something very different and very hard, adding in a voice protagonist, but it didn't really stay true to what most Bethesda games are about, giving us the maximum ability to kind of influence the direction of the game, and a voice protagonist kind of detracts from that a bit, just because of the sheer amount of lines they have to give. I'm not saying it can't be done at all, but I'm saying Bethesda really should try their best to stay away from this, and instead focus on the content of the dialogue rather than the means and quality of which it's delivered from. What they did right, obviously keep the current customization system, definitely bring back the weapon and armor smiths. Now, I'm not saying allow us to add holographic sights to our swords, unless you want to, Bethesda, but do add something like that gives us the ability to greater customize our weapons, whether that be giving them different textures and whatnot, and different abilities, because I think it does add in an extra layer and level of variability to combat, which really made Fallout 4's a hell of a lot better, you know? No longer will it be just a complete fight between, oh, who's got the higher stats, but now maybe, oh, look, this sword can make you melt into pieces if you're a Nord, or whatever that case may be. I think it'd be really cool for Bethesda to emphasize the customization of weapons a bit more. And not to say that I don't think they did a good or bad job at this with Skyrim. I actually think they did very well with all the different variants of weapons you had. Like, I remember the Jarl's Bane and things like that. There were a lot of cool customizable weapons in Skyrim. Let's just add even more of them to TES 6, because it doesn't seem to be hurting anything, and only improves the quality of combat, in my opinion. So what are your opinions on Fallout 4 so far? Where did Bethesda f*** up, and where did they go the right way? Do you believe they should bring back some sort of variant of settlement mode? There is no wrong answer to this question, unless you say yes. There's a hell of a lot Bethesda can do with TES 6, and there's a lot of lessons they can take from Fallout 4. It's just a question of which ones. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to slap a like on it, dislike if you did not, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.